Hello there. Today I'm going to be talking about shoelaces. Now that might sound strange, but it was inspired by a video I saw recently by a quite well-known maker of YouTube videos and who focuses on language learning and linguistics. And he said that one of his tests on whether somebody is functional in a language is if they know the word for shoelace. Now, his statement was something like, if you don't know the word for shoelace in a language, you can't speak the language. And I don't think that's correct. And this video is really about why. So, there are endless debates about functional fluency, about whether somebody can function in a language. I don't want to get into those because they go on and on and on with many different concepts of what fluency means and so on. I've even made videos on this topic. You can find those in my playlist. And the idea, though, that you need to know the word for shoelace to be functionally fluent, to be able to converse in a language, struck me because it reminded me of a friend who was studying Czech with me a few years ago. And she was constantly studying lists of vocabulary. And she knew the word for octopus, she knew the word for hovercraft, and other obscure words. But she could hardly say anything. She was effectively mute in the language. And I don't believe that if she had the word shoelace in her vocabulary list, that would have helped her to converse in the language at all. That's because building up your vocabulary in a language, sure, that's fine. It's always good to know more words. But even if a word isn't in your passive vocabulary, it doesn't matter. Never mind being in your active vocabulary. And it doesn't matter because you've got the magic word, what's that? Magic words, what's that? If you're speaking with somebody and they say, oh, I need to get some new shoelaces, you can say, what's a shoelace? And they'll say, oh, it's blah, 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 and rephrase it in a different way. And if you're reading something, you can always look the word up in a dictionary. Ah, I didn't know what a shoelace was, now I do. So not knowing a word is hardly a problem. In that case, what is it that stops certain people from being able to have conversations in languages? And it certainly isn't knowledge of the word shoelace. Well, in my opinion, it's because people believe they have to express everything exactly as they would in their own language, and that's just not correct. Because there is an infinite number of ways to express any idea. So, for example, if I wanted to talk about shoelaces but didn't know the word, I would be able to say, those strings on shoes to stop them from falling off. That's not using any complicated vocabulary. Or if I can't say it that way, you just say, those long soft things that keep my shoes on my feet. You know, there are loads of ways to say it, and the other person will then say to you, you mean shoelaces. And I guarantee that hearing the word used in context like that, particularly when you've been slightly embarrassed because you didn't quite know the word, will then make that word stick in your memory. It then will become a word you know. Much better than just studying it off lists once you've got the basics out of the way. Likewise, it lives in the sea and it has 8 legs. This is a way you can express an octopus. You didn't know the word for it, you didn't even know the word for tentacles. Or if you say to somebody else, you use the word octopus, don't know what it is, they would say to you something like this, and you go, oh, okay, now I know what an octopus is, and you'll probably remember it. Okay, so this concept of not worrying about not knowing a word, but re-expressing it is essential. It's essential to activating a language, being able to speak a language. So how do you go about activating a language? So the one approach is to get out there. Some brave people do that, even in an early language learning. They get out there and they speak to real humans. There are 2 downsides to that. One is it can be quite scary. And the second is it's often limited to very simple conversations in a shop. I want a newspaper, or meeting people in the street. Hello, how are you? Where do you come from? It doesn't exactly stretch you. So unless you have a lot of bravery have very patient people with you, and have a lot of time with them. So is there any way to build this skill when you're on your own? Yes, there is. This isn't an idea I've invented. Lots of people have talked about this. So I'm just explaining it to those who might not be familiar with the idea. And it's talking to yourself in the language. Now, what does that mean? Well, it could just mean sitting there and rambling away about random thoughts that you have. But that isn't necessarily the best idea, because firstly, it's very boring, and secondly, it's tempting to only be able to express things that you're very comfortable with, so it doesn't stretch you. So another technique that I often see proposed is describing everything you see. So the idea here is that you're in a house and you look around and you say, there's a sofa, there's a photo, there's a dog. Or you're walking down the street and you say, I see a school, I see a man. I've got two problems with this. I mean, it's really good in the beginning stages, but I've seen two problems happen. One is that it tends to focus on nouns. You tend to describe visual objects that you see rather than situations. So it's very tempting to say, I see a school, but not to say, I see a boy flying a kite, and the kite is being blown by the wind. You tend to stop when the situation gets difficult. So you end up just repeating over and over again, I see, and then a noun, which doesn't really stretch you. So how do you force yourself to be stretched and get beyond the trivial? So the best idea that I've heard many people propose and have used myself and found it to be extremely useful is summarize everything you hear or read. So read something or listen to the radio and then summarize it in your own words. And because there are an infinite number of ways to express an idea, you simplify. Take something that's expressed in a very complicated way, and if it's too hard for you to express, say it in a more simple way. Yeah? So, and as you gain experience, you'll be able to express the same idea in more sophisticated ways. And this skill slowly builds over time. Difficult at first, but very soon you'll find that you can re-express things, no matter how simple your vocabulary is. And then over time, you'll be able to get better and better at this skill. And that's what's important here. Because, sure, re-expressing things in your own words, it does find holes in what you can express. But instead of panicking, I don't know the word for shoelace, you will have gained the experience of not caring about that and just re-expressing the thing in word you do understand. Okay, I've seen a program and it was talking about those strings on shoes. You forgot the word for shoelace, it doesn't matter. And this will train you not just for summarizing things, but also for expressing your own ideas. So you go into a shop, your shoelace has snapped, and you say, the string on my shoes has snapped. I need to buy a string for my shoes. And they'll go, oh, you mean shoelaces? Ah, yes, okay. Yeah. Now I believe that this skill is one that can be built over time, that you get better and better at, and that carries with you across languages. So the first language that you study, you don't have this skill at all, probably. You're used to expressing things very precisely in your own language, but not used to summarizing. But the first foreign language you study, you slowly develop this skill. Then you take the skill with you to the next language that you study. Yeah, so it teaches you the skill of being fluent with what you have, because you can summarize not just things you read, not just things you hear, but your own thoughts, no matter how complicated they are. You can summarize them and re-express them in a very effective way. And I believe personally that very experienced language learners, you've seen they can learn new languages very quickly and become able to converse in those languages. And a large part in that is that they've developed over time this skill of simplifying and re-expressing any concept, no matter what their level in the language. And of course, as their level improves in the language, they can express things in a more sophisticated way. But even with a limited vocabulary, even with limited ability in a language, you can still build up this skill of re-expressing. And it is this that I feel is at the heart of functional fluency, not knowledge of the word for shoelace. Thank you.